Welcome to the Clinical Research Podcast, bringing you the latest developments in research explained by our world-leading clinicians, academics and scientists based in Nottingham. In the latest of our interviews with winners of Research Heroes Awards, Andrew Bennett talks to Clinical Research Manager Lucy Ryan.
Congratulations. I saw the poster they put out and it said some very, very nice things. Optimism, dedication, perseverance, organisation was some of the reasons you were cited.
Wow, that's amazing. I didn't actually know that. So thank you. I don't feel like I am a hero, but I'm very grateful for everybody or whoever nominated me. It's nice to have some recognition and to know that people actually thought what I did was a good job.
You've been singled out as coordinating the COVID team in the early days of the pandemic, particularly running ISARIC. Yeah. Of course, that was a huge study, so a big commitment. Can you tell us about that? Because things were pretty full on, I'm thinking back to March last year, that kind of
time. From what I can remember, it's all a bit of a blur. I think the adrenaline kind of wiped my memory over those months. We had ISARIC on our shelf since 2013. It was a study we set up in preparation for a pandemic or a novel pathogen. So as soon as we heard of COVID-19 and it slowly made its way over to us, we began to look at how the study would run and what we would actually need to do. Luckily, we used to do sort of annual refreshers of what the study actually meant. So we kind of had it already in our heads a little bit. And so when we first got our patient, when we found the first patient on intensive care, we kind of all grouped together and all went up to see the patient. We couldn't speak to him because he was sedated and in a coma, unfortunately. But we had that first conversation with his wife and daughter. And we thought we might just get one or two. We never thought it'd quite affect us in the way that it did. And so we started with the one patient, and then the next day we saw somebody else, and then all of a sudden it seemed to hit us like a wave, and we kind of didn't quite know where to start. So we all just muddled together. We obviously put everything else on pause, and we just tried to approach it as pragmatically as possible. And I just tried to reassure people that we could only do what we could do, and there was no pressure to push people to push themselves too hard. So, you work within your own skills and your own ability. Everybody was really scared at that time because we weren't quite sure how it was going to affect us. So people were obviously quite apprehensive. So I took it upon myself to make sure that I kept people as reassured as possible, even though I was scared. I didn't know what was going to happen. And yeah, we kind of just went from there. We took every day as it came. I'd like to think that I had this big plan and, I spent a bit of time trying to formulate a way that it would work effectively. But I think from what I remember, we just turned up every day. We had a cup of tea. We made sure everybody was okay. And then we just approached all of the patients that we could, having lists, making sure there was clear communication between everybody, and also making sure that we laughed. So my cousin made me a kindness jar for Christmas the year before, and I'd used it a little bit, and I thought this would be the perfect thing for the team. So we had this jar in the office with a bit of hand gel next to it. So if you needed to read something funny or look at a funny picture, because her kids had drawn all these funny pictures on these bits of card, they used to gel their hands and put their hand in and get something, a nice little quote or a funny picture. And it was the little things like that that kept people going.
All these things coming at you, what you need to do professionally, the team ethos, how you might feel personally about this. How did it feel?
That's it's a really good question, and it's something I've probably not really thought about yet. This is probably a little bit of therapy. So it's at the time it was so big we didn't know where to start, and that was really intimidating because we just didn't know what on earth we were going into. Is this going to last a week? Is it going to last 4 years? You just didn't know. So I think I certainly put it to the back of my mind, and I just turned up every day to do the job that I needed to do that day. And I tried not to think about it. That's something that I do quite well, I think. Just put, if something's too big, if you steer it all in one big chunk, it becomes overwhelming, and you end up just going around in circles because you don't quite know how to eat the elephant. But if you just break the leg off and eat the leg, then that's one part of the elephant you've already eaten.
Did you manage to get a lot of laughter with the jar and the funny pictures, and how well did that work?
It worked really well. So luckily I worked with a wonderful bunch of people that, as intensive care nurses and ED nurses, we've got a very sick sense of humour anyway. So we do find humour in all crisis. So it was quite easy to find a funny side of something. COVID wasn't funny, but it was the little things each day. If you get changed in uniform and you put your uniform top on the wrong way around, little things like that. And then when we started, because we had to work just as a small team to begin with, and then once once the numbers started picking up a lot and all the other research paused, we got this huge influx of new people coming in to support us, but also you were getting to meet all these new research nurses that you never knew existed.
But ISARIC's made a real difference, hasn't it? That's a very significant study.
The ISARIC's been great. So it kind of created the basis of all the data collection for a lot of the COVID studies. So we were finding that kind of this, because ISARIC was data collection and sample taking, so there wasn't any intervention involved, it was all observational. And as other COVID studies were developed, they would basically feed into the ISARIC data collection. So it meant that you needed to collect less data for a certain study as long as they were in ISARIC. And the great thing about it as well is that when the patient started receiving remdesivir as part of normal clinical treatment, we were collecting extra data as part of ISARIC. So it's been great because it's that you've got just a central database of all the information that you could ever possibly need about ISARIC. And also they could change treatments based on what the sort of patients they were seeing. Because the patients that we were seeing in the first wave were different to those in the second and the third wave.
There was a time in the summer where the COVID cases dipped, then it came back in a vengeance, autumn, winter. Yeah. It was really hard in January. How did you keep that team spirit?
It was all about making sure people knew that I'd only ever expect what they could do, and not making them feel like they needed to work at like 500% all of the time and do all the overtime and recruit every single patient you could ever possibly see with COVID. So it was all about, do what you can do. If you need help, please let me know. Make sure you're having rest. Make sure you're having your break. So we were very good at all going for lunch together most of the time, and social distance. So we could just sit and have half an hour where we all just sat and didn't talk about COVID. Or if we did, it was kind of stuff outside of work. But yeah, just making sure people felt supported enough, but not pressured. There was a time where we thought, we had to recruit every single patient into COVID because, that's what we should do, but that's not always possible. And people can say no. And people, especially on intensive care, some patients were far, far, far too sick to be given these new drugs to. And it was about just making people realize that, we can't do everything. We can only do what we can do. And then ultimately everybody then just, they're just motivated to work really hard, I find, because they've got an expectation that they're just doing the best, just getting through the day.
How do you feel personally, as a clinical research manager, to have contributed to, the battle against COVID-19 with all this research?
I'm really honoured. Something to tell the grandkids. This is kind of like the pinnacle of being a research nurse, or working in any sort of clinical environment. You don't get this opportunity very often, and hopefully we won't get this opportunity again. So actually, I feel really proud to have done it and come out fairly unscathed. And also, just kind of, it's exciting. And we went through a stage where we would get really excited about COVID, and you almost felt a bit guilty for kind of enjoying it. But that's what we're here for. We're research nurses, finding new treatments and, saving lives is what we should do. I think my opinion on it probably would be a little bit different if we were in the middle of another wave, but I'm feeling quite positive and optimistic at the moment. It shone a light on research. Everybody knew that research went on, but I don't think clinical teams, unless you had any active involvement in research, really understood what a research nurse did and what impact they can have on patients. But this is kind of blown open the doors for collaboration between clinical teams and an appreciation as well for what we do. And we don't just walk around with clipboards, because I think prior to COVID, that's probably what a lot of people thought we did: make posters, walk around with clipboards, sit and drink tea. But we don't do that.
What's next for DREEAM then, Lucy?
Wow. So we are slowly moving into acute medicine a little bit more. So primarily we've been focused on the emergency department and critical care. But we're working with the acute medicine directorate to try and encourage them to be more actively involved in research, giving them more access to nurses. So we've increased our team quite a lot this year, which is amazing. So we've got that ability now to support more people who want to be involved in research. So hopefully we'll encourage some medics, ACPs, hopefully, to be involved in research and use our skills to support them and make them realise it's not as difficult as sometimes it may seem. We're also going to be working over at City a lot more. So we're going to be spread around the trust, trying to find a new normality post-COVID. Who knows what it'll look like? Taking each day as it comes.
Well, thank you for contributing. Really do appreciate your time.
Thank you very much.
Not at all.
Take care.
Thank you, Lucy. Have a great day. Goodbye now.
Bye.
So that was this episode's Research Hero. You can find more of them by subscribing to this podcast or visiting nuh.nhs.uk/research. Thanks for listening. There are links in the show notes for more information on clinical research in Nottingham, and the website is nuh.nhs.uk/research. Our email and social media links are there too. If you want to stay up to date with the Clinical Research Podcast, you can find us on iTunes, Spotify, Google, wherever you normally get your podcasts. The more shows are rated and reviewed, the more search engines like them, and the easier it is for people to find us. So if you can subscribe and rate and review us, you'll be doing it for science, not just for our egos.